Before 24 million Americans in the White House press room, Donald Trump slammed Barack Obama with a brutal insult, vowing that 8 years of empty speeches had left the nation weak. Cameras zoomed in as Trump's voice rose, but Obama's calm silence stretched for 7 agonizing minutes, pulling every heartbeat in the room toward him. When rage and restraint collide under blinding lights, which leader will history remember? In the next few seconds, you will witness the truth that they never wanted the public to know. The press room had never felt so claustrophobic. Reporters pressed shoulder to shoulder, the red dots of recording lights glowing like snipers' sights. Microphones craned forward as if hungry to capture. Blood pens hovered above notepads, ready to immortalize every syllable. The air was thick with sweat and electricity, the kind of tension that made a whisper sound like thunder. And then, with a sudden lean forward, Trump dropped his line. 8 years of speeches, zero results. The insult cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Gasps scattered across the room, followed by murmurs rippling in every direction. Some reporters smirked knowingly, others froze, eyes flicking from Trump to Obama as though waiting for a counterpunch. Trump thrived on this. He knew how to turn a room into a battlefield. His grin curved like a blade, his posture restless, radiating the energy of a man who had found his target and was ready to finish the kill. But across the room, Barack Obama did not flinch. He sat back, posture steady, his expression unreadable, like a mountain unmoved by a storm. The lights caught his profile, calm against chaos, and for a fleeting moment the cameras lingered longer on his stillness than Trump's fury. It was not absence, it was presence. Not weakness, but control. Every second he remained silent twisted the knife of suspense deeper into the room's collective chest. Trump slammed the podium with his palm, the sound jolting like a drumbeat of war. "That's the truth," he barked, his voice sharp, demanding dominance. His eyes darted toward Obama, daring him to react, to speak, to rise. But Obama remained motionless, his hands folded lightly, his breathing measured. It was as if he had been here before, had seen this exact play unfold, and already knew how it would end. The reporters felt the clash of energies, a chaotic blaze on one side, an ocean's calm on the other. Sweat trickled down temples, pens scratched half-formed notes, and every lens adjusted to capture the collision that had not yet come. The atmosphere quivered between explosion and implosion. One wrong move could ignite the entire room. Trump smirked wider, mistaking silence for surrender. He leaned closer to the microphone, his voice dripping with contempt, repeating the charge louder this time, like a hammer striking the same nail. 8 years of speeches, zero results. The words hung in the air, heavier now, more venomous, and yet the silence felt heavier still. The echo of Trump's words still rattled through the air when he leaned in again, voice sharper, louder, hungry for dominance. "Hope doesn't pay the bills." He snapped his hand, cutting through the space like a blade. The phrase cracked against the walls of the press room, bouncing from camera to camera, reporter to reporter, until it felt as though the whole building itself trembled under its weight. The audience at home leaned closer to their screens, waiting for the former president to strike back. But Obama remained still. Reporters whispered under their breath, their voices barely audible, yet frantic, the way gamblers whisper before the final card is flipped. A Fox News journalist scribbled weakness exposed across a notebook, while just 2 seats over, a CNN correspondent muttered, "He's waiting." The contrast was brutal. Trump radiated fire, all gestures and sparks, while Obama radiated silence. A calm so unyielding, it began to feel like an invisible wall pushing back. Even the hum of the cameras seemed to fade, their lenses tightening in on Obama's face, as though searching for cracks in his armor. Then the smallest movement, a shift so subtle it could have been missed if the room wasn't already holding its breath. Obama's hand rose slow and steady, and he adjusted his tie. Just a simple adjustment, nothing more. Yet the effect was seismic. Gas broke out in the front row, a ripple of recognition moving through the crowd. To the seasoned journalists, it was a signal to tell Obama wasn't cornered, he was preparing. Trump noticed it too. His smirk faltered for half a second before returning sharper, almost forced. He gripped the podium tighter, leaning forward as if to close the distance between himself and the man who refused to play by his rules. "You hear me? That's what America remembers. Hope is cheap. Bills aren't." His words grew harsher, but they landed with less certainty, like punches thrown too quickly. The tension was unbearable now, thick enough to choke. Silence wasn't absence anymore. It had transformed into strategy, a weapon sharper than any insult. The reporters knew it. The cameras knew it. Even Trump in his chest must have known it. The room had turned into a battlefield with no bullets, no fists, just the clash of rage against composure. The longer Obama said nothing, the louder his silence became. His steady presence cast Trump's fury into sharper relief, every shout echoing with a hint of desperation. The contrast was cinematic, like fire thrashing against stone sparks flying, but never breaking through. A young journalist in the back whispered, "He's pulling the room in," without even speaking. And then Trump snapped. He jabbed a finger across the crowded room, his voice tearing through the tension like a whip. "There he is, Mr. Talker." The press room froze again, cameras snapping in rapid fire, reporters gripping their pens like weapons. All eyes shifted to Obama, the man in the chair, the man who still had not spoken. The grenade had been thrown and everyone waited to see if it would finally explode. For a heartbeat, the room was a battlefield of stillness. Trump's finger still pointed like a weapon, his smirk stretched wide, certain he had cornered his rival. Reporters braced for an explosion, pens trembling above paper cameras locked tight on the man they thought would finally break. But Obama did not snap. He rose. It was slow, deliberate, a motion that seemed to echo louder than any insult hurled that night. The scrape of his chair against the floor cut through the press room like the opening crack of thunder before a storm. Every head turned, every lens adjusted, every whisper died in an instant. The noise of Trump's fury collapsed into silence, as if the entire world pressed pause to watch one man stand. Obama's frame straightened, tall, unshaken, his shoulders squared with a calm authority that radiated across the room. He didn't rush. Every step forward was measured, almost meditative, as though he was dragging the gravity of the room with him. Reporters leaned in, unable to look away. One veteran journalist muttered, "He's done this before." Another whispered back, "No, he's doing something different." Trump tried to hold his smirk, but it looked thinner now, stretched too tightly across his face. He leaned closer to the podium, his voice louder than before, as though volume alone could claw back control. "See? He's got nothing." Silent as ever. His laugh was sharp, but the echo felt hollow. Because the power had already shifted, everyone could feel it, even if they couldn't yet explain why. Obama reached the microphone, but he didn't speak. He simply placed both hands on the podium, fingers spread steady as stone. The metal stand groaned faintly under his touch, the sound slicing through the room's breathless anticipation. He scanned the crowd, not hurried, not desperate, but patient, as though he was letting the weight of the silence speak for him. The tension rippled like a wave. Reporters gripped their pens harder, their knuckles white. Camera shutters clicked in rapid succession, each flash a lightning strike against the still air. Even the seasoned aides at the back shifted nervously, sensing that the ground beneath them was no longer firm. Trump barked again, "Go on, Barack." Say something, but the demand sounded brittle, forced, like a performer losing his rhythm. And that was when it became clear. The silence wasn't weakness, it was command. Every second Obama held it, the anticipation grew sharper, more unbearable, until the room itself seemed to bow under its weight. Trump had been playing to the noise, but Obama had claimed the silence. And in that silence, the narrative bent in his favor. The audience watching at home could feel it too. The stillness wasn't empty, it was electric. It was the storm's pause, the breath before lightning strikes. And in that breath, everyone realized the balance of power was no longer Trump's to hold. When you're insulted publicly, what has more power, reacting fast or waiting until silence speaks louder? The silence was suffocating, hanging in the press room like a storm cloud ready to break. Trump's jaw tightened, and in the face of that unbearable stillness, he did what he always did. He got louder. His fist slammed against the podium with a crack that echoed off the walls, jolting reporters upright in their seats. "We're stronger now than ever," he thundered, his voice rising like artillery fire across the chamber. Some reporters nodded, not out of belief, but from reflex, soldiers conditioned by years of press briefings, their pens scribbling phrases they knew would make headlines. But the nods were mechanical, hollow, stripped of conviction. The real weight in the room wasn't in Trump's booming voice. It was in the man standing silent just a few feet away. Obama didn't flinch, didn't shift, didn't give the cameras a single dramatic cue. He simply scanned the room, his gaze deliberate, steady, as though he could see every heartbeat and measure every breath. The suspense tightened like a wire drawn taut. Every word Trump barked seemed to spark against it, energy flashing outward, but none of it pierced Obama's composure. Instead, it was absorbed, swallowed by that silence until the fury seemed smaller, less commanding. The contrast was unbearable, one man blazing, burning fuel recklessly, the other a quiet horizon, drawing the fire into himself without a flicker. Reporters felt it in their bones the collision was no longer even. Trump leaned forward, sweat shining under the lights, his finger stabbing the air like a weapon. "We've rebuilt strength, rebuilt pride. Obama left us weak, I made us unbreakable." His words shot like bullets, sharp and fast, but each one felt thinner than the last. He was fighting to keep control, and everyone could see it. Even his supporters in the back shifted uneasily, nodding with hesitation instead of conviction. Obama's silence wasn't passive anymore. It was predatory. He let Trump's noise crash and crash again, his eyes moving slowly across the rows of journalists, anchoring them, holding them. The longer he stayed calm, the more the room's rhythm followed him instead of Trump. Cameras that had swung wildly toward the podium began to linger on Obama's face, zooming tighter, searching for the smallest flicker of movement. But there was none, only the steady presence of a man who knew the weight of patience. The press room felt like it was tipping a balance, shifting right in front of them. Trump's energy filled every corner, but it was frantic, sparking, already burning out. Obama's energy was quieter, heavier, gravitational, pulling the room in, bending it toward him without a single word. A reporter in the second row whispered, almost afraid to speak, "He's already won the room." And yet Trump doubled down again, pounding the podium once more. The sound desperate now, like thunder trying to drown out the silence of the night. Stronger than ever, he barked, voice cracking, just slightly. The shout echoed, but the echo died quickly. The silence that followed didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to Obama. The air quivered after Trump's last shout, his words still rattling against the walls like stray bullets. Cameras stayed locked on Obama, the silence thick enough to squeeze the breath from every chest in the room. And then at last he moved, not with fire, but with a voice calm, low, steady. "Pride isn't measured in numbers," he said, each syllable cutting sharper than a scream. The effect was instant. Reporters froze mid-scribble, then redirected their pens, their eyes, their energy. It was no longer Trump they were following, it was Obama. The sentence dropped into the silence like a stone into still water, sending ripples across the press room and beyond. The contrast could not be starker. Trump's fists in fury against Obama's measured tone, one man burning himself out while the other carved control with a whisper. Trump blinked, caught off guard, then lurched forward to grab back the spotlight. "Numbers are everything," he barked, slamming the podium again. His voice cracked, betraying the strain of his own momentum. But the cameras betrayed him too. They swung tighter on Obama, catching the calm curve of his posture, the reflection in his eyes, the deliberate way he held still, as if refusing to be pulled into Trump's chaos. Reporters leaned closer, their pens racing now, not with Trump's slogans, but with Obama's words. The story had turned in a heartbeat. The underdog who had been silent was suddenly the headline. A CNN journalist whispered to her colleague, "That's the line. That's what makes the front page." Obama didn't press his advantage. He didn't need to. His stillness amplified the weight of his words, every pause commanding the room to lean further in. Trump's defenses grew louder, harsher, like a man shouting to cover the sound of his own crumbling footing. "We're winning again. Jobs, markets, strength, you can't deny it." His voice thundered, but the thunder rolled thin, echoing off walls instead of striking hearts. And still Obama's presence consumed the moment. His calm was no longer just composure. It was power, the kind that made noise seem desperate. For the first time, the reporter's eyes didn't return to Trump when he spoke. They stayed fixed on Obama, waiting, anticipating, knowing the balance of control had shifted. Trump's smirk faltered, his rhythm broken. He tried to force the spotlight back onto himself, jabbing the air, shouting statistics, but each strike landed weaker than the last. The room had made its choice. Without raising his voice, without matching the fury, Obama had pulled the current toward him. The twist had arrived. The man who came in as the silent shadow had become the story. and Trump, the self-styled showman, the master of spectacle, was suddenly playing second to silence. Trump's face flushed crimson under the unforgiving lights, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead, as his words grew sharper, meaner, more venomous. "You left America weak, Barack. You left it broken." He spat his finger, jabbing the air as though it could pierce his opponent. The force of his voice rattled the podium, but the cracks in his performance were starting to show. His rhythm rushed, his laughter brittle, his bravado sounding like desperation in disguise. Obama didn't flinch. He stood at the microphone, his expression composed, his gaze steady, every gesture deliberate. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The calm in his posture mirrored a professor lecturing a student who hadn't done his homework, measured, patient, unbothered by the noise. Each pause he took seemed to magnify the imbalance, making Trump's frenzy look smaller, more childlike against the weight of his composure. The reporters felt at first the subtle shift in power. Their pens no longer scrambled to capture Trump's tirade. They waited, anticipating Obama's next measured response. The clicking of camera shutters slowed, then sharpened, every lens lingering longer on the man who hadn't broken stride. The silence surrounding him wasn't passive anymore. It was active, alive, drawing the room into his orbit. Fear trembled in the air, but it wasn't directed at Obama. It was the fear of watching Trump unravel. Trump's insults grew sharper, his volume louder, his smirk stretched too tight to feel real. "You're a fraud, a talker, nothing more," he barked, pounding the podium again. But the impact felt weaker each time, like echoes fading in a canyon. The more he tried to dominate, the more obvious it became that he was losing control. Obama leaned forward slightly, his hands still spread across the podium, his voice calm as steel. He didn't need paragraphs. A single line dismantled the fury. His restraint was a blade hidden in plain sight, slicing through chaos with elegance. The press room absorbed the moment like a collective inhale. The man who had been insulted stood taller, while the insulter shrank under the weight of his own fire. The transformation was cinematic. Awe replaced fear, silence replaced noise, composure replaced chaos. Reporters exchanged glances that said what words couldn't. The balance had tipped. This wasn't Trump's stage anymore. It belonged to the man who hadn't rushed, hadn't shouted, hadn't flinched. In a world of shouting, which endures longer fury or patience, Trump leaned forward, gripping the edges of the podium as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. His voice, once booming with certainty, now cracked at the edges. Another speech about hope. He sneered, but the rhythm was wrong, too fast, too sharp, betraying the nerves that pulsed beneath the surface. The insult should have landed like thunder, yet it fizzled in the air, exposing a tremor in the showman's performance. Obama didn't answer. He didn't move. He let the silence stretch taut and merciless until it coiled around every throat in the room. Reporters leaned in instinctively, pens, hovering cameras zooming the sound of shutters like the click of a countdown clock. Each second without a reply amplified the suspense until it became unbearable, a weight pressing down on everyone present. Trump filled the vacuum with noise, but even his words sounded like they were ricocheting off a wall of calm. "Say something," Trump barked again, his voice pitched higher than before, echoing with frustration. He jabbed the air, searching for control, but it was slipping through his fingers like sand. His sentences tumbled over each other, colliding instead of landing, the practiced rhythm of his attacks breaking apart in real time. His fury was loud, but it no longer felt commanding. It felt desperate. Obama's stillness deepened his silence, becoming the focal point of the entire room. He didn't need to raise a hand or even adjust his tie this time. His very refusal to be baited became the most powerful move of all. The reporters exchanged glances, their whispers hushed as if they were witnessing something larger than politics, something elemental. The contrast was absolute, one man flailing louder, the other drawing the room closer by saying nothing at all. The tension had reached its breaking point. The press room wasn't just waiting for words, it was waiting for judgment, for the moment the silence would finally give way to something irreversible. And with every heartbeat it became clearer, the man who spoke less was the one commanding more. Suspense had never felt this suffocating, this electric, this close to erupting. The room was suffocating under the weight of suspense, every second of silence coiling tighter, every camera lens trembling on its stand. Trump's smirk widened as he mistook the stillness for surrender. his voice sharp with mockery. See nothing. Just another empty speech about hope. His laughter cracked, brittle, echoing into the silence like glass splintering. And then Obama moved. He leaned forward, his voice steady, calm, and clear enough to slice through the tension like a blade. A president doesn't prove himself by tearing people down, he said, pausing just long enough for the words to hang heavy in the air. He proves himself by lifting people up. The effect was instantaneous. The room froze as though time itself had been nailed to the floor. No scribbling of pens, no whispered commentary, no nervous coughs, only the ringing silence of history being etched in real time. Cameras zoomed so close that every line on Obama's face became etched in light, while Trump's smirk twitched, faltered, and collapsed into something thinner, more uncertain. Reporters felt their pulses quicken, their hands almost trembling to capture the words. But many couldn't even move. The line had pinned them in place. The air vibrated with the weight of it, that kind of rare moment when language transforms from sound into monument. Outside, millions watching at home leaned closer to their screens, stunned into silence by a sentence that felt destined to be repeated. Trump tried to laugh it off, his voice a little too loud, a little too quick. More speeches he muttered, but the words fell flat, limp, as though they belonged to another room entirely. The spotlight was gone, ripped from him by a single sentence, delivered without force, without rage, without spectacle. The twist had arrived, undeniable and irreversible. One man had shouted, cursed, and pounded his fists. The other had waited, chosen his moment, and dropped a line that reframed everything. The balance of the night had shifted in an instant. The event wasn't about Trump's insults anymore. It was about Obama's truth. And in that unbearable silence that followed, everyone knew they had just witnessed history pivot. For a long second, no one moved. The sentence still echoed like a bell tolling through the air, refusing to fade. Then, as though released from a spell, reporters lunged for their notepads, pens scratching furiously, keyboards clattering, every journalist desperate to be the first to capture the moment. Camera shutters clicked in a frenzy, the white flashes exploding like lightning as Obama's words replayed in their heads. A president doesn't prove himself by tearing people down. He proves himself by lifting people up. Social media lit up instantly. Within seconds, the line was clipped, looped, and posted across every platform. On Twitter, the hashtag #LiftPeopleUp ignited, spreading like wildfire from Washington to Los Angeles, from college dorm rooms to late-night diners. Another tag, #ObamaMoment, surged just behind it, a tidal wave of retweets and split-screen reactions. Millions watched the clip replayed in slow motion, Trump's smirk faltering Obama's calm delivery. The room stunned into silence. TikTok edits layered the words over swelling orchestral music. Instagram Reels paired the line with quotes from history. The internet had already crowned its victor. At the podium, Trump tried to recover. His jaw clenched, his lips curling into something meant to be a smile, but looked more like a wince. More speeches, he muttered louder this time, waving a dismissive hand. That's all he ever had, just speeches. But the words rang hollow, stripped of force, swallowed by the storm already raging outside his control. Even his aides in the back shifted uncomfortably, sensing that the momentum had shifted permanently. Obama didn't press the moment. He didn't bask in the applause or punctuate his words with theatrics. Instead, he stepped back from the podium, folding his hands lightly in front of him. His expression remained calm, almost serene, as though the explosion of energy in the room had never touched him. That silence once again was his weapon. It filled the void, demanding the cameras stay fixed on him, making every attempt from Trump to claw back attention look smaller, weaker, desperate. The reporters knew the story had already been written. Their headlines were no longer about Trump's insults, but Obama's restraint. One journalist whispered, "We came for a takedown, but we just saw a masterclass." Another, eyes wide, said, "He just turned silence into the loudest sound in America." The entire room felt the aftershock, an invisible tremor that shifted not just the balance of the press conference, but the weight of legacy. Across the nation, people stopped what they were doing to watch the clip. In barber shops, televisions replayed the moment on loop. In kitchens, parents pulled their children closer and repeated the line aloud. In dorms, students raised their phones like trophies, shouting, "This is it, this is the moment." For some, it was inspiration. For others, frustration. But no one could ignore it. Trump's frustration grew more visible with every second. He pounded the podium again, his voice rising, straining. "Don't let him fool you," he barked. "He failed this country, don't forget that." But the words no longer landed. They bounced brittle and thin off the armor of Obama's composure. Every desperate shout only deepened the contrast, the fury of a man fighting for dominance against the calm of a man who had already claimed it. Obama stood unmoved, his silence like gravity pulling every gaze back to him. He didn't need to say another word. The line had already taken flight, spreading further than the walls of that press room, further than Trump's voice could ever reach. It was no longer a debate, it was an echo, a memory being carved into the consciousness of a nation. The aftershock was undeniable. The question was no longer who shouted the loudest, but who carried the deepest weight. And as the camera zoomed in one last time on Obama's steady frame, the nation was left to wonder, do leaders prove strength in the blows they throw, or the dignity they leave behind? The aftershock inside the press room hadn't even settled when the digital storm erupted outside its walls. In less than 5 minutes, the clip of Obama's sentence, "A president doesn't prove himself by tearing people down. He proves himself by lifting people up," was already looped, subtitled, and pushed onto TikTok by dozens of accounts. By the 10th minute, it had been reposted thousands of times, edited over swelling cinematic scores, slowed down to highlight the flicker in Trump's smirk, and cut into 14-second bursts designed to loop endlessly. Each replay carried the same electricity, the same stillness, the same sense that history had just tilted. Twitter ignited next. The hashtags #LiftPeopleUp and #ObamaMoment ripped through the feed like wildfire, trending simultaneously in every major city from New York to Los Angeles. Journalists live-tweeted fragments of the exchange, influencers stitched their commentary, and ordinary citizens poured their emotions into short bursts of text. "I don't care about politics," this line hit me, one post read, racking up 200,000 likes in under an hour. Another clip, edited with slow-motion zooms and captions in bold red letters, crossed 1 million views before dinner time. On Instagram, Reels paired the line with grainy black and white shots of American flags waving in the wind, transforming a single sentence into something mythic. In homes across the country, families stopped mid-dinner as phones buzzed on the table. A father in Omaha set down his fork, replaying the clip for his kids. "Listen to this," he said softly, eyes locked on the screen. "This is what leadership sounds like." In a small apartment in Brooklyn, a mother replayed the video 3 times in silence before whispering, "That's the man I told you about." Even in households divided by politics, the moment demanded attention. Some rolled their eyes, others leaned closer, but no one could ignore it. Barbershops turned into makeshift theaters, screens balanced on counters while customers and barbers alike gathered around. In Detroit, a barber shook his head as the line replayed. "That's class," he muttered, clippers still buzzing in his hand. His customer leaned back in the chair, smirking. "Class don't fix potholes, but damn, that was something." The whole shop erupted in debate, half arguing about results, half marveling at the composure. The clip had become more than politics, it was fuel for conversation, reflection, even argument, but always with the same center, the words themselves. Diners, too, became stages. In a roadside cafe in Kansas, truckers huddled around a small TV as the replay cycled on cable news. Coffee mugs clinked as one old man leaned forward, his voice gravelly but firm. "Reminds me of Kennedy," he said. A younger man scoffed. "Words don't pay the bills." But even he couldn't hide the fact that he'd replayed the clip twice on his phone under the table. In that small room, in the clatter of plates and chatter, the sentence had slipped into everyday life. College dorms were no different. In Arizona, a group of political science majors projected the clip on a wall, arguing over body language, tone, and timing. One student whispered almost in awe, "He didn't yell once, and he still crushed him." Down the hall, students in another dorm weren't even political junkies yet. They looped the clip on TikTok with ironic captions, half joking, half serious. It didn't matter whether they agreed with Obama's politics, the rhythm of the moment was too powerful to scroll past. The wildfire carried an emotional current that pulsed through every share, every replay, every whispered retelling. Validation was the first spark. People who had longed for calm leadership felt vindicated in a single line. But hope was what kept the fire burning. the sense that dignity hadn't been erased from the public stage, that even in a storm of shouting, composure could still command the world's attention. Across screens, across dinner tables, across dorms and diners and shops, the clip lived its own life. And as the night deepened, one truth became clear: this wasn't just a viral moment. It was a reminder echoed in millions of voices that words, when chosen carefully, could still move a nation. The wildfire of Obama's sentence spread through every screen, but with it came sparks of division that flared across the nation. Supporters saw poised under fire a man who had stood against fury without raising his voice, and they celebrated it as proof that dignity could still prevail in the public square. "That's leadership," one woman declared in a Chicago cafe, slamming her coffee cup down for emphasis. "He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He reminded us who we can be." Her table mates nodded, eyes shining, replaying the clip again, as though drinking from it like water after a drought. But not everyone saw it that way. In conservative strongholds, the reaction was swift, sharp, and dismissive. Talk radio hosts mocked the line with venomous laughter. "Lift people up," one sneered over the airwaves in Tulsa. "Try lifting the debt first." Callers chimed in, jeering that Obama was peddling Hallmark card leadership, accusing the media of swooning over fluff, while ignoring what they saw as real progress under Trump. To them, the moment wasn't history, it was theater, a staged whisper meant to distract from numbers they believed told the truth. Across living rooms, the divide cut deep. In one Atlanta household, a father replayed the clip with tears welling in his eyes, telling his teenage son, "That's the kind of man you want to be: calm under fire, strong without rage." Next door, a neighbor shook his head at the same footage. "That's weakness," he muttered, clicking the remote in disgust. "I don't need someone lifting me up. I need someone fighting for me." The same sentence, the same silence, but two entirely different reflections, one source of hope, the other of scorn. On college campuses, the split was no less dramatic. In a crowded lecture hall at Arizona State, a professor replayed the clip for his students, analyzing the shift of body language and rhythm. "Notice how silence framed his words," he said. Some students scribbled notes, furiously inspired. Others rolled their eyes, one whispering, "Talk won't pay my tuition." The clip became a mirror, reflecting back what each viewer already wanted or feared to believe. Cable news turned the moment into fuel, amplifying the divide with split screens and scrolling captions. Liberal commentators hailed it as a masterclass in restraint, while conservative pundits rolled their eyes, one sneering, "If calm speeches built bridges, we wouldn't have crumbling highways." The arguments grew louder, but beneath the roar, the sentence continued to circulate, quietly carried not by networks, but by ordinary people repeating it to one another. In small towns, diners echoed with debate. At a truck stop in Kansas, a group of drivers argued over coffee and hash browns, voices rising like the engines outside. "That line, that's gonna be remembered," one said, stabbing his fork into his plate. His companions shot back, "Remembered, don't fix jobs. I'll take results over poetry any day." The tension hummed like an engine idling, both men watching the same screen, but living in different Americas. Yet amid the noise, there was something harder to dismiss: the resonance that lingered long after the shouting stopped. In quiet moments between fathers and daughters, between teachers and students, between barbers and customers, the line was repeated not as politics but as wisdom. It lived outside the fight like an ember, glowing stubbornly against the storm. The nation was polarized, yes, but in that polarization lay the proof of its power. For his supporters, the sentence was a lifeline. For his critics, it was a target. But for everyone, it was unforgettable. And that was the measure of its reach, a single sentence that forced Americans to ask themselves not just what leadership is, but what it should be. The line had left Obama's lips inside a press room, but by the next morning it was playing in classrooms, whispered in kitchens, and written across chalkboards like scripture. Professors replayed the clip in lecture halls, pausing to dissect posture, tone, timing. Notice the silence before the strike. One explained to his students, his voice hushed, as though describing the final brushstroke of a masterpiece. Students leaned forward, some inspired, some skeptical, but all unable to look away. The sentence was no longer just politics, it had become a case study in power. In suburban kitchens, parents passed the words down as lessons. A mother in Seattle crouched beside her daughter before a school phone in hand, replaying Obama's calm delivery. "Listen," she whispered, "strength doesn't always mean shouting." The girl nodded, repeating the line softly as if practicing it for a future she couldn't yet imagine. In another home, a father leaned across the table to his teenage son, repeating the phrase not with awe but with gravity. "Remember this when someone tries to tear you down." For them, it wasn't about who said it was about who needed to hear it. But not all ears received it the same way. In coffee shops and gyms, critics scoffed, dismissing the words as hollow poetry, the kind of sentiment that inspired applause but no solutions. "Easy to say, hard to live," by a man muttered into his newspaper. "Talk doesn't fix roads." His friend shrugged, replaying the clip anyway, as though even dismissal required a second look. The sentence had lodged itself in the nation's bloodstream, beloved by some, mocked by others, but ignored by no one. The debates carried an almost cinematic tension. In a crowded barbershop in Detroit, the line was repeated between snips of clippers and bursts of laughter. One man nodded solemnly. "That's what my old man used to tell me. Don't waste time breaking others when you can build them." Another fired back instantly. "Sounds nice, but you can't cash it at the bank." The shop buzzed louder. Voices rising, the words bouncing off mirrors and walls reflected back in a dozen interpretations. In churches, the line slipped into sermons, folded into the rhythm of Scripture. Pastors quoted it from pulpits, weaving it with verses about humility and service. Congregations murmured in agreement, repeating it in the pews like a prayer. Yet outside in diners and truck stops, the same words were scrawled on napkins and mocked in casual conversation. For every person who claimed it as wisdom, there was another who called it weakness. And that was the twist. The sentence had slipped away from Obama himself. It was no longer tied to the man who delivered it, no longer anchored to the press room where it was first spoken. It belonged to the people now, each repeating it through their own lens, bending it into hope, criticism, memory, or defiance. The line had become a mirror reflecting not Obama's voice, but the values, fears, and longings of those who echoed it. In living rooms, lecture halls, barbershops, and churches, one truth crystallized: words can outgrow the speaker who gave them life. They can be adopted, twisted, cherished, or scorned, but never returned. The cameras had recorded Obama saying the line, but history was recording America repeating it. When words leave a leader's mouth who truly owns them, the speaker or the audience that repeats them, the sentence had escaped the press room and taken on a life of its own. But within hours, the political machinery moved to seize it. Conservative outlets fired first, mocking the line as sentimental fluff. On television panels, pundits sneered, "This is Hallmark leadership, good for greeting cards, useless for governance." Their words dripped with disdain, branding Obama's calm as weakness, his silence as emptiness wrapped in poetry. Meanwhile, liberal press outlets ran in the opposite direction. Headlines praised the moment as a return of dignity, plastering Obama's still frame across front pages like a relic of steadier times. Anchors replayed the footage in slow motion, framing it as proof that composure could still conquer chaos. Their commentary rose with reverence, contrasting his restraint against Trump's fury, as though the clip itself had restored something lost. The divide was instant and absolute. On one channel, Obama was a professor delivering a timeless lesson. On another, he was a performer staging a cheap trick. Social media split accordingly, feeds filling with dueling clips, conservatives overdubbing his words with mocking sound effects, liberals layering orchestral music to elevate them into prophecy. Outrage clashed with pride, each side digging deeper, each side convinced the other had missed the point. The spin machines churned, amplifying every angle, until the moment itself felt weaponized. Conservative radio roared, "Lift people up. Try lifting wages, lifting borders, lifting the country off its knees." Liberal commentators countered with equal fervor. This was leadership in its purest form, dignity under fire. The airwaves became a battlefield, each sentence torn apart, repackaged, and thrown back into the public square with sharper edges. Yet beneath the roar of commentary, the original line still lingered. People replayed it quietly, apart from the noise, choosing for themselves what it meant. For some, the spin hardened their stance, pushing them deeper into outrage or pride. For others, the division only underscored its power. If a single sentence could ignite this level of fury and reverence, then perhaps it had touched something raw, something undeniable. The press had turned Obama's words into ammunition, but the country was left holding the shrapnel. Outrage gave way to pride. Pride sharpened into division, and the cycle fed itself like a machine running on gasoline. Yet through it all, the question remained, was this just spin, or had America witnessed the return of something larger than politics? While the press spun its narratives, the real conversation unfolded on the ground, in the places where politics was less about sound bites and more about survival. In a Detroit barbershop, the televisions replayed Obama's sentence on a loop as customers argued over the buzz of clippers. One man leaned back in the chair nodding. That's leadership calm under fire. Across the room, another shot back, calm, don't fix rent. I need someone who throws punches, not poetry. The barbershop hummed like a courtroom, every voice a verdict. In Kansas City, at a dusty construction site, the clip played on a worker's phone during lunch break. Hard hats ringed the screen, grease-stained gloves, tapping against metal lunch boxes as men and women weighed the words. He shut him down without even raising his voice, one worker said, shaking his head in awe. Another scoffed, yeah, try that silence when your job's on the line. I want someone who fights, not someone who waits. The site buzzed louder than the machinery parked nearby. The debate had eclipsed the workday. In Phoenix classrooms, the line became a teaching moment. A high school civics teacher paused the footage, asking students to reflect on what leadership meant. Some students admired the restraint, claiming it showed intelligence. Others dismissed it, rolling their eyes, saying strength was measured in action, not words. Even in the back rows, where politics usually drifted, like static phones lit up with the clip, students replaying it between texts, half engaged, half enthralled. The split was everywhere: cafes, bus stops, living rooms. Families clashed mid-dinner, forks frozen halfway to mouths as voices rose. In one home, a grandmother repeated the line softly. He proves himself by lifting people up, as though it carried echoes of her own father's lessons. At another table across town, a teenager slammed his fist. I don't want a lifter, I want a fighter. The same words, but two Americas colliding in every kitchen. The mini-climax arrived in the quiet after the arguments, when the noise of barbershops and construction sites and classrooms gave way to reflection. Across kitchen tables, one question echoed like a drumbeat. What kind of leader do we need? Some saw the answer in silence, others in shouting, but no one could ignore the line that had forced them to ask. The sentence that began as a counterpunch in a press room slipped quietly into the bloodstream of everyday life. Workers repeated it during smoke breaks, the words tossed around like a reminder of something larger than deadlines and paychecks. A president doesn't prove himself by tearing people down, one man murmured, wiping sweat from his brow. His co-worker finished the thought with a sigh. He proves himself by lifting people up. For a moment, the construction site fell silent, grief over broken promises hanging heavy before the phrase reignited a spark of hope. Teachers wove the line into their lessons, turning history classes into reflections on dignity and strength. A teacher in Phoenix wrote it on the whiteboard, watching her students copy it down beside quotes from Lincoln and Kennedy. Some rolled their eyes, some grinned, but the words lingered, stubborn and insistent. Remember this when you think leadership is only about power, she said, her voice cracking just slightly. In that crack was grief for what politics had become and hope for what it still might be. Pastors carried the sentence into pulpits, weaving it seamlessly into Scripture. To lift people up is not just politics, it is faith in action. One preacher declared his congregation, murmuring amen in unison. The line became prayer transformed into a chorus that filled sanctuaries across the country. Grief for a divided nation bent low in the pews, but hope rose with every repeated word, turning silence into something close to song. In diners and living rooms, it became shorthand in conversation. Parents repeated it to their children after arguments, not as politics, but as wisdom. Couples whispered it in the quiet of long nights, using the phrase to remind themselves of kindness when the weight of the world pressed too hard. For many, it was no longer Obama's, it was theirs, reshaped into a reflection of their own lives. The phrase had grown larger than politics, stretching beyond partisanship into something human. It carried grief for what was lost, hope for what might be regained, and reflection on what leadership truly means. Was it measured in bridges built, laws passed, or victories claimed? Or was it measured in the way a single sentence could make ordinary people feel seen, respected, lifted? And so the question echoed across America: do we measure leadership by what it achieves, or how it makes us feel about ourselves? The storm raged outside. Clips replayed debates, roared headlines, screamed, but Obama himself said nothing. No interviews, no late-night appearances, no carefully worded statements. The line was left alone, suspended in the air like smoke after a gunshot, untouchable. And in that deliberate absence, his silence carried more weight than any response ever could. Reporters hounded his aides, asking when he would speak again, but the answer was always the same: he wouldn't. Cable anchors speculated endlessly, filling hours of airtime with their own interpretations. Was it strategy? Was it indifference? Yet every unanswered question only deepened the mystery, sharpening the power of what had already been said. The silence became its own performance. While Trump thundered across rallies, repeating the insult with greater fury, Obama's quiet stood like a wall, unmoving, immovable. The absence of noise was not weakness. It was strength disguised as stillness. Each day that passed without a word was another day the sentence grew unchallenged, echoing louder than all the shouting around it. In living rooms, people noticed. "He doesn't need to add anything," a mother in Boston remarked, showing the clip again to her teenage daughter. That's why it matters. In barber chairs and classrooms, the silence itself became the lesson, proof that sometimes restraint was the boldest move of all. The patience wasn't passive. It was active, chosen, deliberate. And slowly the power shifted. Commentators who had mocked the line as hallmark leadership began to admit its staying power. Opponents who had dismissed it as fluff found themselves repeating it, if only to argue against it. The silence had turned the phrase into something untouchable, something that couldn't be dragged into the mud of daily spin. Obama's choice not to speak again was itself a statement, an unspoken reminder that not every battle is fought with volume. Some are won by letting words stand alone, unbent, unbroken. And in that stillness, the patience transformed into power, reminding the nation that silence, when chosen carefully, can thunder louder than any storm. Trump refused to let the moment die. At rally after rally, his voice rose higher, harsher, each insult sharpened to a blade. He mocked the sentence, jeered at the silence, pounded podiums with fists that left microphones rattling. But each shout seemed to echo shorter, the crowd's cheers thinning into uneasy applause. What once sounded like dominance now carried the faint tremor of desperation. Clips began to circulate side by side, Trump red-faced, roaring into a microphone, contrasted against Obama's calm, steady delivery. The edits were merciless, cut into loops where the fury collapsed against the silence. On TikTok, teenagers layered dramatic music under the comparison captions reading, "One screams, the other doesn't have to." The videos racked up millions of views, and with every share, the contrast grew sharper. Inside newsrooms, producers chose the calmer image, knowing which one carried gravity. Obama's still-frame hands on the podium became the default shot, while Trump's raging face became background noise. The former president's energy once commanded cameras, but now it seemed frantic, almost theatrical. His voice thundered, but the weight of it slipped, leaving nothing behind but the sense of a man swinging at shadows. Even his supporters noticed the shift. At a rally in Ohio, one man muttered to another, "He's angrier these days." The reply came with hesitation, not conviction. "Yeah, but maybe that's what we need." The exchange revealed the crack support was still there, but the certainty had weakened. The louder Trump grew, the more obvious it became that he was chasing something already lost, and the twist was undeniable. The more Trump shouted, the smaller he looked. His rage, once a weapon, now painted him as frantic against the backdrop of Obama's restraint. The calm had become the contrast, the silence, the scale by which all noise was measured. And in that relentless comparison, Trump's fury no longer loomed, it shrank. As the shouting on screens grew hollow, the quieter spaces of America began to carry the real weight of the debate. In town halls, the clip was replayed, not as spectacle, but as a spark for discussion. Citizens gathered in folding chairs, some nodding at the calm delivery, others crossing their arms in doubt. A man stood up and said, "Sometimes silence is louder than rage." Another countered, "Or maybe it's just weakness hiding behind pretty words." The room buzzed divided, yet bound by the same question. In churches, the words found a different rhythm. Pastors wove the line into sermons, framing it as a reflection of humility, patience, and service. Congregants repeated it softly, folding it into prayers as if it carried a moral weight beyond politics. Yet outside in parking lots and lobbies, debates flared again. "We don't need patience," one woman said sharply. "We need fighters." Her friend shook her head, whispering, "Fighters burn out. Builders last." Workplaces echoed with the same tension. In break rooms and conference calls, the clip surfaced, played on phones between sips of coffee. Some employees laughed at the silence, calling it stage rehearsed. Others defended it fiercely, insisting that restraint had given the sentence its power. Even managers normally silent on politics found themselves admitting that the calm struck deeper than the noise. Everywhere the silence was being reframed not as absence, but as architecture. It was the pause that built tension, the restraint that turned a simple sentence into a national mirror. People who had dismissed it at first began to admit that the quiet had forced them to listen harder. The fury had roared and faded, but the silence lingered, unsettling and magnetic. By the end of the week, the reflection was impossible to ignore. The nation wasn't just replaying Obama's words, they were dissecting the silence that carried them. Was it weakness to hold back, to resist the instinct to strike? Or was it the deepest form of control, the kind that bends a room without raising a voice? The question hung over pulpits, dinner tables, and office desks alike, demanding an answer. America still wasn't sure it could give. The press room lights had long dimmed, but the sentence refused to fade. It lived on in classrooms played through scratchy speakers as teachers pressed pause and asked students to consider its meaning. Chalkboards bore the words alongside passages from Lincoln, King, and Kennedy, the white dust smudging into permanence. Students copied them down, some rolling their eyes, others feeling the quiet weight settle into their notebooks like an inheritance. Nostalgia clung to the air as if they were watching a moment already etched into history. At family dinners, the clip replayed on glowing phones, balanced between salt shakers and plates. Parents leaned across the table, voices softened with reverence. "This is what leadership sounds like," one father whispered to his children, pressing the phone closer so they could hear every syllable. In another household, a grandmother repeated the words slowly, her tone gentle, almost like a prayer. "He proves himself by lifting people up." For her, it was not just politics, it was memory echoing lessons she had carried from her own father's lips. Online, the clip found a new kind of permanence. Archived on YouTube channels, clipped into TikTok trends, preserved in podcasts, it spread beyond the churn of headlines. Comment sections filled with nostalgia, people writing, "I'll never forget where I was when I heard this," or "This was the last time politics felt human." The words became a kind of relic, shared, reposted, immortalized. Even those who disagreed couldn't ignore its staying power. Mockery only fueled the repetition, and repetition carved permanence. The nation carried the moment forward in pieces. Teachers used it as a lesson, parents as guidance pastors, as sermon fuel workers, as shorthand in break rooms. What began as a clash between two men had grown into a touchstone for millions. It no longer belonged to the press room, to the reporters, or even to Obama himself. It belonged to the people who repeated it, sometimes with pride, sometimes with doubt, but always with recognition. And in that recognition lay something larger than politics. Nostalgia transformed into permanence, the memory of one sentence refusing to be buried by the noise that followed. The storm had passed, but the echo remained steady, haunting alive. It was proof that some words, when carried by silence, can outlast the very moment they were spoken. The years moved on, but the storm of noise that once filled the press room faded into static. What remained was not the fury, not the insults, not the shouting. It was the silence and the line carried within it. A president doesn't prove himself by tearing people down. He proves himself by lifting people up. Those words, whispered in classrooms, repeated at dinner tables, and carved into memory, lingered like the low hum of truth that refuses to die. Generations began to treat the moment as a reference point. Teachers asked students to analyze it not just as politics, but as a lesson in restraint. Parents told their children that strength wasn't in the volume of a voice, but in the steadiness of conviction. Even skeptics years later admitted they remembered where they were when they first heard it. The sentence had transcended debate. It had become a touchstone, a marker of how leadership could look when measured against chaos. The climax of the reflection was simple yet profound. The line endured because it was more than a rebuttal, it was a definition. Leadership was not the art of striking hardest, nor the skill of humiliating an opponent under bright lights. Leadership was the ability to lift others, to remind people of their worth when the world tried to convince them otherwise. And that truth, carried quietly through time, proved louder than all the noise that had once tried to drown it. The noise of that night had long since faded, but the silence that followed still echoed. The shouting, the insults, the podium, pounding, all of it blurred into the background of history, forgotten by many who once swore it would define an era. Yet the calm reply, the steady line endured. It carried itself not through microphones or rallies, but through whispers, memories, and repetitions passed from person to person like a torch. Strength isn't proven by calling others unfit, it's proven by reminding people why they matter. The narrator's voice, measured and cinematic, rose against the backdrop of history's roar. It was more than a sentence. It was a mirror, a challenge, a question that reached beyond politics and into the marrow of human life. Generations would return to it, quoting it in classrooms, inscribing it into journals, whispering it at gravesides where loved ones had taught them the same lesson in quieter ways. The lesson was not about Obama alone. It was not about Trump, not about the press room, not even about the millions who watched that night. It was about something deeper, the kind of strength that outlives spectacle, the kind of leadership that is remembered not for its noise, but for its impact on those who carry it forward. The sentence became a compass, pointing not toward division, but toward dignity. And in a world drunk on shouting, its sobriety was revolutionary. In towns across America, echoes of that night remained stitched into daily life. A father in Omaha reminded his son during a heated argument, "Tearing people down is easy, lifting them up is harder, but that's where strength lives." In a Phoenix high school, a teacher closed her lesson by writing the line on the board, then added softly, "Don't just memorize it, live it." In a Detroit church, a pastor repeated the phrase during a sermon, his congregation murmuring in unison, their voices carrying the weight of both grief and hope. The inspiration was not always loud. It was often quiet, shared at kitchen tables, in text messages between friends, in the soft pauses of conversations where words failed and a reminder was needed. The line was no longer attached to a single man. It belonged to the people who repeated it, molded it, lived it. The permanence of the moment wasn't in the viral clip, but in the transformation it inspired in those who carried its truth. And yet, even with its spread, the line was never without challenge. Critics scoffed, calling it empty rhetoric, a polished soundbite meant to win applause. They demanded results, numbers, battles fought and won. But the counterpoint was always there, rising steadily. Results crumble, statistics fade, victories are forgotten. What endures is how a leader made people feel small or significant, diminished or lifted. The power of the line was that it asked everyone to measure strength, not by conquest, but by compassion. The narrator's voice lowered, threading through the chaos of the present into something timeless. Strength isn't proven by calling others unfit, it's proven by reminding people why they matter. The words rolled slow, deliberate, with the gravity of a final verdict. It wasn't just an echo from the past, it was a charge to the future. For every person who heard it, the question wasn't political, it was personal. And so the story closed, not with applause or fireworks, but with reflection. The press room had become a battlefield of words, but its legacy was a lesson etched deeper than politics. The silence, the restraint, the dignity. These were not strategies for a single night, but reminders of what endures when noise collapses. In the quiet of that realization, the audience was left with a choice. In your own life, do you want to be remembered as someone who tore people down or someone who lifted them up? Life often convinces us that the loudest voice wins, the one that interrupts, dominates, and demands attention. But this story reminds us of something deeper. True strength is found in restraint and composure, in knowing that silence can speak louder than fury. Barack Obama's calm response in the face of insult wasn't about clever words. It was about reminding people of their worth. That lesson transcends politics. For those of us over 50, we know life is full of battles, family struggles, workplace conflicts, health scares, financial uncertainty. We've seen shouting matches and quick tempers tear relationships apart, but we've also seen how patience, listening, and choosing words carefully can heal wounds, bridge divides, and leave a legacy worth remembering. Dignity doesn't age. In fact, it becomes more powerful with time. So perhaps the real takeaway is this. Leadership isn't just about titles or podiums. It's about how we treat the people right in front of us. We all have the power to lift others up with a word, a gesture, or even silence held at the right moment. Action. Question. In your own life, when conflict arises, will you choose the easy path of tearing down or the lasting strength of lifting someone up? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.